Now in this tutorial we're going to take you through the basic 360 methodology with an indoor kite. Now one of the things when folks start flying around in circles is it's very easy to get caught in survival mode. So what I very much recommend, especially as you're becoming familiar with indoor flying, is to punctuate your attempts with landings so that you can actually bank your successes incrementally instead of getting into this ever oscillating kind of survival mode. So when we do our 360, what you're going to see is that I'm going to launch very similarly to how I did with the up and over, except that as the kite is going up, I'm actually going to bank over and then carry the kite around. So let's go ahead and show you how that works, and then I'll break it down a little bit more. So once more, it's going to be the same as the up and over, except that I'm going to kind of lead the kite towards one side. So here we go. We'll go up. There it is. Come back to where we started, and then land. So we use a lot of the same principles, one of which was keeping our hands very, very close when we fly, even around in the circle. As I'm going around in the circle, I might be pulling my top wing back very, very slightly just to give it that extra lift so it just stays away from the ground. But the other thing you'll notice is that I'm keeping my arms extended. Once the kite is in flight, they'll be extended. So here we go. So my arms are out big, and then I'll take my landing again. So the main reason for having the arms out wide comes down to radius. So the simple explanation for this is that if I have my hands close to me, in order to create tension, this needs to move away from the kite. So that means that my point of tension is actually on my feet. And so I actually have to be moving my feet everywhere in order to create power. But if I put my arms out, I can now create a radius around my body to put power on the kite without backpedaling quite as much. So you'll see the difference here. There it is. So I'm going to keep going for a moment. You'll see my hands are close to my body, and I really have to pick up my step. But if I let my arms out and start moving them around me like the hands on a clock, I'll actually get more power. So the other way too, just like we did with the up and over, is the one-hand method. A lot of times it's just more difficult for a new indoor flyer to manage the kite when we're using both hands. So we'll use that same method here. What I'll do is put my left line on my left ring finger, my right line on my right thumb. We'll do that launch, and then just very slight turn with that ring finger. There it goes. And we talk about radius. We don't even need to walk in order to create that. But if I come in here, now I definitely have to walk until I put my hands back out. So hands out, nice and straight, and slightly leading the kite as well. Now the other thing that I want to talk about in terms of walking is stride. When a new flyer is just getting their legs indoors, what you'll see is that a lot of times folks are stepping down on their heels, or you kind of get this pat kind of step. So there's two things. One is that you want to make sure that you're actually stepping onto the toe and then rolling the heels. You'll get a much smoother step. The other is it keeps your hips level. So when you're moving, the hips should be more or less at the same altitude. If they bounce, so does your hands. So once more, smooth step. We also open our stride, so we're not in the pitter pat. And we find a kind of a stride that, the way I always describe it is pretend you're going to your mailbox. You've been there a million times, so you're going to the local market, and that stride is just, it's consistent, it's smooth. So even as I go around, again, you'll notice the smoothness in the step, the way we roll, a consistency of speed. It's neither rushed nor slow. And my hands will be extended. So here we go again. Going up. There we go. Nice open step. And then I'll take my landing. So if you go around once or twice, then take the landing. And so ideally what you're working up to is a point where you will actually be repeating the same process again and again and again, which is the real trick to gaining skill on anything. Once you've done it 30 times, you'll know more than you did the first time, no matter how well you did. So you just keep attempting. So here we go again. Go up. Then I'm going to take my landing. Take the breath. Go again. Go around. Take the landing. See, I already won twice. Here we go. Same thing again. Now, as you go through and you experiment with these different launches, the other thing you want to try is how much pressure you're actually applying. So find out what overpowering the kite feels like and find out what underpowering feels like, because then you'll know what the true medium is. So here we go, once more. I'll put on a little too much pepper. Here we go, a little too fast. Right, it's a little harder to manage, but it's working. Okay, a lot twitchier. Now we'll try slow. Little trickier to keep up in the air. Easier to steer, but pretty light on the lines, just eking around. And then you'll hit a point once more, arms extended, where the kite has one constant speed. Which takes me to the last point, which is positive drive. So positive drive, I think, is almost more important indoors than it is anywhere else, although it applies to any maneuverable sport kite. And positive drive, quite simply, equates to creating enough pressure in the kite that it's underpowered. So I think that a lot of folks, when they fly indoor, what ends up happening is that the kite is, the way I describe it is, it kind of looks like they're carrying it around on a pillow. It's like we're sort of in this trying to hold it up mindset. But if you bring it to the point where you actually have positive drive, right, your energy is turned on, the kite's not rushing, it's not blown away, but it's turned on, the kite will actually create exponentially more power than it should, scientifically for that speed. So again, you're traveling, say 0 is the kite resting on the ground, and then 100 is like where the kite is got so much pressure that it's almost deforming, right? So positive drive typically begins at about 30-35% of a kite's speed, sometimes 40% depending on the setting of the kite. So if you're traveling at less than 35% of the kite's potential speed, you're probably having to work more with your legs than you have to. If you hit the 35% and then you carry it up to probably 70 to 75%, that whole range right there, that's the sweet spot. That's where the kite is actually designed to fly correctly. And then as you reach up into beyond 70 to 75% of the kite's speed, that's where it's going to start to get some deformation from the pressure and start to get a lot more wiggly. So we'll take all of that into consideration. Here we go. Around with the 360. There's my positive drive. It's turned on. It's sustaining itself. Now if I slow down a little bit too much, there it is. Now I'm having to carry it around. And then if I start going too fast, it might actually get faster than me or start to travel into its own draft. And that's the last topic that I'm going to touch on here, especially when you're going in the 360s, is that because you're in an indoor environment, where your kite has traveled, it's actually left disturbance in the wind. So if there was smoke or vapor in this room, you would be able to see the patterns. Even as I've passed one spot, come around, you would still see some of the texture in the air from the area that I just passed through. And the way that translates is that when you're flying, you may normally have pressure. You go around, pressure's good, and then all of a sudden you'll feel it really oscillate, like suddenly it's almost like driving over a slightly bumpy road, and that is your own turbulence. So that's the other caveat to flying too quickly, is that if you fly so fast around in that circle, you will definitely get around to that draft in its very early, most volatile stage. But if you let that circle breathe, or even choose a different area to fly through, then you will avoid that and get clean air. So one more time. There it goes. So right now I've got that nice medium speed, positive drive. I've got a little bit of my own turbulence, but not a lot. But once I start going here, you'll see the kite buck at a certain point. It's not bucking. But again, even as you experiment in your own time, you'll feel that from time to time and realize that sometimes when the kite falls out of the air, it's not necessarily because of an input that you made, but just because you've run into one of the natural dynamics of indoor flying. So there is your basic introduction to 360s. I remind you to punctuate your attempts with landings.
don't judge yourself until you've done it at least 10 times. You know, after each 10 attempts, then come back and sort of do your general calculation and everything, then try 10 more. After 50, again, you'll be better than you were the first time. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.